Shalom and welcome to Life Lessons. We are on segment 38. As you know, the 5 books of Moses are divided into 5 parts, as we call them 5 books of Moses. We have Bereshit, known as Genesis, Shemot, known as Exodus, we have Vayikra, known as Leviticus, we have Bamidbar, known as Numbers, and we have Devarim, known as Deuteronomy. And we find ourselves in the book of Numbers. This is where section 38 is. Parashat Korach, the section of Korach. Korach is the story of the rebellion of Korach, that he was Moses' cousin, and he rebelled against the idea of priesthood, not accepting that Moses speaks in the name of God, that maybe he makes up certain things on his own, as we're soon going to see. But first, before we talk a little bit about Korach, so obviously we're talking about leadership and responsibility. So they say there was once an individual that was looking for a job, filled up his resume, and he's about to be hired. When he comes to the interview, so one of the questions that he was asked, is he a responsible person? That's a very important question. So the person that was interviewed thought about it, and he says, in my last job, when anything went wrong, they said I was responsible. So I guess I am responsible. So obviously when it comes to the word responsible, it depends what it means. And some of us may take it very seriously, but some of us may think it doesn't matter. But in that idea of being responsible, because really as individuals, we are all responsible for what we're doing, but then becomes more the task when a person is in a leadership position, then being responsible becomes even more important. In the life of Judaism, and from that I believe it has translated to many other religions too, but originally speaking in Judaism what we find is sometimes what people will say that there may be a contradiction or a conflict of what we would call the spiritual life and the physical life. By many people, the idea of calling somebody religious, a religious person, will tend to say that this person is more of a spiritual person. Now we could go into a whole discussion of what spirituality means. But in generally speaking, somebody that doesn't care so much about physical needs, or we would say that physical needs come secondary, and the main thing is spiritual aspiration, connection to the Almighty, connection to God, and things like this. And then you have what we would say, some people would call people that are involved too much in materialism, too much in the physical, indulgement in food, thinking too much about making money non-stop, where the person's involvement is only on that, and there's no room whatsoever for a little bit of prayer, a little bit of going to synagogue, a little bit of studying. Where the physical needs take over all spiritual aspiration. Because we are told that as human beings, we have both. We are created and we have inside us, the way Kabbalah explains, we have the good inclination and we have the evil inclination. The good inclination tends and helps us. It's the drive to do good, to do positive. The evil inclination is just the opposite. And many times we could see that these two drives exist at once. Here I have from one point, at 1 minute, I want to do the right thing. And just like this, a minute later, I just want to do the opposite. And sometimes the individual starts wondering, maybe I need to go to therapy. What's going on over here? It seems like I'm a confused person. So really, it's not a confused person. That's really what's happening to human being. But God gave us the ability where the good should be able to overrule the bad. Not to say that there's no bad. That's sometimes impossible because we are all human beings, unless somebody that worked on themselves, and that's what we call righteous people. Righteous people is that they are fully in control of themselves. To give an example that maybe we could a little bit understand, let's say a person gets upset about something or insulted, somebody said something to you. So we tend, because we're human beings, to answer back. To control ourselves and not to answer back, sometimes it demands quite a lot. Even if I make to myself a decision in the morning, when I get up and I say, today I'll be very careful, and even someone insults me, I will not answer them back. Maybe it will work for 1 time or 2 times, because sometimes the insult is so tense or so big that our reaction automatically, all of a sudden, we forget everything that we have decided and everything what we have been thinking. So that means, in the language of Kabbalah, where the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, has taken over completely. And then, as we all know, a few minutes later, we regret. It says, I shouldn't have answered back. And it's interesting how it is brought down, that a successful way, and this is brought down in psychology, the sources, a lot of it is in discussions, in the Talmud and in the Torah, that when it comes in education, and let's say parents that want to punish a child or get upset with their child, many times is the best result is if it's what I call a calculated anger. Many times a parent sees something and they right away want to react and want to say something. Obviously, it depends on the age of the child. But many times if we want to be successful, especially let's say if it's a teenager and the parents are going to turn and say something harshly, you lost that child because you didn't act appropriately. But if you think about it, and let's say you feel you need to be angry, but the anger comes because you've calculated yourself, you thought about it, and you feel that I need to now be angry. So that's called a calculated anger. That kind of an anger is going to have much more results than a burst out. So that's the way human beings are, and that's the way we are. But the point I'm trying to bring out is a lot is connected, because if we want or if we don't want, constantly there's the struggle, what I would call the desire to be more spiritual and the desire to be more involved in mundane, in the day-by-day materialism, that sometimes they come into a clash. I could use simple examples. Saturday morning, let's say, when I need to go to synagogue, there's a baseball game that is very important, and all of a sudden I'm in a conflict what I should do. They say the famous, I think it's a joke what they say, that the rabbi met one of his parishioners and he says, Yom Kippur is coming, and the night of Yom Kippur is very important to come to synagogue. That individual turns to the rabbi, I've got a very, very huge problem. This is World Series that night, and I cannot come to synagogue because I need to watch the game. So the rabbi says to him, I heard there's something new on the market out there. You could tape the whole game, and then after Yom Kippur you could go and watch it. So the parishioner says, "Oh, Rabbi, I just came up with a good idea. How about we get you taped? And then we could watch you later." Anyways, it's just a joke. So again, this is what's happening here in our Parsha, because everything is connected with what we saw the segment before. The segment before, in 37, there was a story of the spies. The spies that went to Israel, they were sent by Moses, and they came back with a bad report. How it's explained now, and we talked about it last time, a very interesting way of looking on things. We're trying to explain about all these people. They were not just rebellious, bad. That's an easy thing to come and say, that someone was terrible. There has to be some reasons why did they come back with a bad report. What was, from a positive point of view, their problem? What did they, in other words, why did they want to stay in the desert? Here's an interesting thing. They are in the desert. And Moses says, we have a promise to go to the promised land. Just go look on it and come back. I would assume that a person wouldn't want to stay in the desert, would want to get already to a living place. How much could you live already in a tent? And everything that you need is very different than if it would be your home. So we find about them something interesting, because the Torah describes life in the desert as much as we would say from a physical point of view was as challenging. However, spiritually, it was very uplifting. Because if you read in the Torah, which would say in the Bible, a very interesting story. Food came from heaven. The manna came from heaven. Imagine that. Nobody has to cook. Nobody has to bake. Food is prepared. They also tell us, how about the clothing? They didn't need to wash. It automatically took care of itself, as it's described. So now the Torah describes that basically their time was devoted to study, to learn, and to get closer to God, spiritually speaking. You don't need to worry about anything mundane, anything physical. These spies, when they came to Israel, saw all of a sudden that there's going to be a change of life. You need to work for a living. You need to plant. You need to sow. It's not going to be simple. Food is not going to come from heaven. That means we're going to have to, as we say, roll our sleeves and go out there to work. They says, you know what? We like it in the desert. We really don't want to go to Israel. And it's interesting the language that they used. And they said, Eretz ochelet yoshvea. This is a land that eats its inhabitants. What does that mean? It's an earth that eats its inhabitants. In other words, the people that live on it become consumed with the needs, what the earth needs, that all of a sudden they're afraid there's not going to be time for anything spiritual. And this is where they went wrong. Because God obviously knows about all this, and by taking him there, is trying to tell them that the purpose is not to be angels, because if not, we could all have been angels. He created us as human beings with all these desires and challenges, but down here in this world, to deal with things down here. Have a job, earn money, give charity, make this world a better world, not just hide in a cave in the desert. That's not what it's all about. By the way, we find very interesting in the beginning of Genesis, there's an individual by the name Enoch. And the verse says that he was taken away by God early. God saw that this individual was a righteous person, but the longer he stays in this world, he may be influenced by the no good people instead of him influencing them, they're going to influence him. So it says he took him away. He took him away as long as he was righteous. He lived a long time, but still he took him away before things go wrong. And that's why in the stories about this individual, they say that one of the things this person used to do, he used to hide in a cave. He was afraid. He was afraid. He was that kind of a person. He knows if he goes out there and he sees things, he won't be able, let's say in our language of our day, to control himself, to control his emotions. So that's the story with the spies. So here, the whole Israel in the time of the desert sees God's reaction to the spies. No good. That to say, I just want to be spiritual is no good. So what does it mean? It means to say, I also have to think about my day-by-day life, mundane things, physicality, as we would say. Here comes Korach. That's where Korach's rebellion comes. It says like this. If the whole idea is to study and to understand, that I understand there's different capabilities. There's individuals are smarter and some are less. So I can understand why there is levels and differences. This one is a great scholar, this one is a little bit less. But if the whole idea is to do good deeds, then there's no differences. Why should there be such a hierarchy of a priest, a Moses? We don't need all that. We should all be the same. And it's interesting what the verse says. And I'm quoting here from the verse. The verse says, and they gathered. This is here on chapter 16, verse 3. It says, they confronted Moses. And they said to him, you made yourself too important. The entire congregation is holy, and God is among them. Why have you made yourself elite over God's assembly? When you hear that, and as we could almost think about our days too, so some of the masses, some of the people say, wow, he's right. And all of a sudden, as it says, a gathering start to become, and followers, and here is what we call a populist message. Everyone is holy. Now, what does it mean that everyone is holy? And this is what he's coming, and this is how it's explained about Korach's theory here. And Korach was a cousin of Moses. His theory is, again, if the whole thing is spirituality, then I understand. Some people are more spiritual than others. But from the story of the spies, we see that's not the goal. Because if not, we would all be staying in the desert just studying and learning. The idea is to get into Israel, and what's going to be the emphasis? Good deeds. How to help each other, how to do a mitzvah, how to do a positive commandment. For that, we are all the same. What he failed to understand is that God wants both things together. He wants a merger. In other words, when we're going to do good deeds, it cannot be lifeless good deeds. They have to be with excitement. They have to be with motivation. And that could only be if you mix some spirituality into it. There has to be a relationship between the creator and the individual that was created. And therefore, whatever we do, yes, God wants us to eat and drink, sleep, do wonderful things. However, all that is for a purpose. And the purpose is to serve God and to become a partner in His creation, in making this world a wonderful world. So therefore, there has to be those two things together. And when we go back to the opening words, I was talking about the idea of being responsible. So we could see over there, it could be in the positive and could be in the negative. Could be that when anything goes wrong, somebody is yelling, looks who's responsible for that. But But why does that come? Because there is a connection between what we're doing and what our character is. It's easy to say out there, and then unfortunately we see in some psychology books and some therapists say, let the person be what they are. They don't push that maybe if the person has some traits that are no good, they should change. Let them be what they are and let's work around it. And that's what happens to quite a lot of us. We say, don't you understand? That's how the individual was born. This is his character. Just work around it. Yeah, but there's a limit how much you could work around it. And if you work around it, this is what we have a lot of problems. When we have a child in school, and instead of trying to train them, we're going to work around it and see how to help him or she to fit in. But how are we going to help them to fit in? Just to collude with their behaviors, then there's a problem. There's no question there has to be a situation where the person is challenged and works on their challenges. So when we come here to these two things, one person could be, here let's take an example, an individual that God bless them and they have, they could live nicely, nice income, don't have to worry like others have to worry. And we see some do very good things with the money that they have, and they themselves are very nice people and they're ready to help out. So other individuals don't feel like, well, this individual, look, he has all this money and look on his behavior and this and that. Like sometimes we like to complain. The other way around, that individual becomes an example and somehow say, great, if God decided to give someone money, he's the right person to have the money. Blessed he should be because he's doing wonderful things. And unfortunately, some of us, when we get blessed, instead of using that blessing, it's just the opposite. We become stubborn and all of a sudden we change in our character and our mood about helping somebody else, and we think it's all us. Saving for what? That it should go to the ground? Or that they always say about sometimes people that don't make good preparations, the accountants will tell you, then what happens after when the time comes? The government will take away everything. So, you have to give charity, you have to be well prepared. It's the same thing when I'm talking about from a point of view of Judaism, also has to be very important that way. Has to be the combination between those two things together. Has to be the combination about spirituality and about the day-by-day things. So here comes Korach, and his idea was, everyone is holy. Everyone is holy. And therefore, we're all the same. That's an easy play of words to say we're all the same. Of course, from the point of view of a soul, we are all the same. However, God gave each one of us different capabilities, and our job is to shine in those capabilities. And this is what's important. If, for example, I am doing something that this is not my field, besides the point, unfortunately, that so much time is going to be wasted on training myself on something that it's not me for no reason, when each one of us has so many good things to them that they could shine and they could do perfect in that. So it's interesting when we talk about the idea of the priesthood, because the idea of the priesthood has two parts to it. It has the parts of it that they were messengers for everyone. All the Jews, especially when they were in Israel, everyone was in a way obligated to come to the temple, and they need to participate and to be involved. However, we know the Torah knew, God knew, that's going to be impossible for everyone to do that. So therefore, the priest was selected. They were not selected as separate entity. They were selected as messengers of the Jewish people to allow everyone, those that have jobs, those are teachers, or whatever other things that they have to do. So people were selected. Those were the priests. They were selected to be the messengers to do the job at the temple. So for one point, they themselves have to be on a more spiritual level because you're working in God's temple. And a lot of times we know very well from somebody that is religious, we kind of demand more, or at least out there. As we know, a lot of times, if God forbid we hear something negative about somebody that is so-called a religious person, that automatically creates bigger headlines than anyone else out there. Why? Because we tend to believe that somebody that's on a religious status is expected that they should be on another moral behavior, and that's the way it is amongst how we look on things. Even though it's interesting what's written in some places that we have no idea. Sometimes somebody that's in that kind of a situation, the challenges and temptations could be even stronger than a regular person. Back to what I said before, each one of us has good drives and the evil drive. And sometimes the greater you are, all of a sudden there's some crazy challenges that are unexpected. But God gives us the ability to overcome it. And that's what we are. Nobody of us is perfect. We are not created as angels. We all are human beings, but we were given the power to do good and the choice, unfortunately, to do the opposite. This story of Korach teaches us that from this negative, there is the positive. How we merge the spiritual with the physical, and we do wonderful things, and we all become partners in God's creation. Thank you.